At some point in the last couple of years, I asked John what he would like me to do in the event of his death. We are very, very bad at talking about these things here. And he said, well, I suppose there'll be a small funeral, but then there'll be a memorial. Well, we're not calling it a memorial. It sounds far too serious. This is a celebratory tribute, a celebration of a remarkable man, a remarkable life, and a truly remarkable actor.
I met John only a few times. First, just after Love and Death on Long Island was coming out here, and I was a huge fan of that film, and I met him and told him how fabulous I thought it was. Then recently, I spent time with John and Anwin at the Isle of Man Film Festival, and I was delighted that he remembered that I had met him on the Love and Death on Long Island promotion, and he was, as everybody will tell you, incredibly generous, incredibly kind, and warm and charming, despite the fact that I was completely starstruck the entire weekend we spent together.
I'm speaking on behalf of my father, who unfortunately can't be here today, but I rang him on my way back from the Edinburgh Film Festival, and he was so keen to share memories of what was a long and interwoven friendship that they had, of encounters in salubrious and indeed insalubrious locations. Unusually for my father, he could be very, very precise about the location when he first met John, because he was working as the principal actor at Lincoln Repertory Theatre, and he said this young boy with carrot-coloured hair strolled into the bar after the show. It was Peer Gynt, I think, and grabbed me by the lapels and said, I have to do what you're doing. I have to become an actor. And Dad said, well, good luck, good luck with that. And about 3 or 4 days later, John returned saying, I've run into a spot of bother, which is that he'd thrown a party, and his father, John's father, was a strict vicar, and he'd been away from home, and John had thrown a party, and on the vicar's return, his father's return, they'd found an incriminating can of beer that hadn't been successfully cleaned away. I'm pretty sure, I was never witness to it, but I was only witness on one occasion that there were plenty of empty cans of beer and indeed empty bottles of wine whenever my father and John met. The first time I met him would have been on one of those occasions when they were filming The Elephant Man, which is a very intense part for John. I remember the first time I met him, he was completely shaven-headed before he did sort of 7.5 hours of makeup, or whatever it was. My dad said 7 hours, that seems incredible to me. But at that time, John was living in Ascot-under-Wychwood, which is on the Paddington to Hereford line, and I used to take that train to school in Oxford from Charlbury. I'd get on the train, I was about 1980, I was probably about 13, 14, and I'd get on the train, my homework, and John would have got on the train earlier from Ascot-under-Wychwood, and sometimes my dad would be there, and they'd be going off to London, and I'd get off at Oxford, and you'd leave them in the Pullman car together, with nursing cups of coffee that I think stayed like cups of coffee while I was there, and then may have materialised or been chemically enhanced to be something else after I left. But whatever, I sort of left them in a huge pile of tweed and corduroy hat and scarf, all bundled together, nursing their coffees, and I'd get off and do a day's school. And then I'd come back at the end of the day, and John would have been, I suppose, at that period doing the Osterman weekend or the hit or rehearsing that, or one of his magnificent voiceovers that he did throughout his career. And often on the way back, I might run into John on the train. I'd get on at Oxford, and he'd be there at the end of his day's rehearsing, about 6 o'clock, and we'd have this sort of 20, 25 minutes together. And the remarkable thing about him, because he was hugely glamorous figure at that time. He was glamorous all his life, but at that time, because of this run of extraordinary films of Midnight Express, Alien, Elephant Man, The Hit, this period, and he was properly, seriously famous and glamorous. And we sat down, and he would ask me about my day at school and what I'd done, and what I had for homework, ahead. And we never talked anything about acting. He would share some of the views that have been alluded to about life and what I should prioritise in my life. And it was a sort of informal tutorial years before I decided to become an actor myself. And then our paths parted, and Dad and John continued in that way of actor friendship to pass each other in various stations, in various jobs, in various locations. And then in around 2010, we met on the set of Harry Potter, and we chatted away. And it felt like a huge moment for me, that in some way this promise that I was actually going to be acting with John Hurt, this guy who had been more than just another actor to me, who'd been a kind of informal godfather. But, we had a chaotic day on Harry Potter with special effects and everything. And then the following year, Thomas Alfredson made Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And Stephen Graham, the actor, said, "When we're in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, mate, it's like we're playing for England." And I said, why is that, Stephen? He said, "Have you seen the actors you're going to be acting with?" And it's kind of like, it's a fantastic group of actors. And sure enough, there was this inevitable scene, which we're going to show, where all of us are sat around at the table: Mark Strong, Colin Firth, Benedict, myself, Gary Oldman, and at the top of the table, John Hurt. And I found myself positioned, if not next to him, then very close to him. And I looked over at him, and he kept winking at me, smoking. "How's it going? How's Freddie? Wonderful. Do give him my life." "Absolutely, John, wonderful." And we sat there all day, and, the camera comes around for the close-ups like that, and you do your scene with the camera very tight on you. And John chatting, anecdotes, putting everyone at ease, And it was just tremendously reassuring then, and indeed on this stage when we premiered Tinker Tailor in this theatre, which is one of the last times I saw John. He was just a tremendously reassuring figure. And I'm absolutely sure that he would probably remember those little train journeys we took together, because he was constantly living in the present. That was my experience, that between takes he would be talking about the next job, what he was aiming to do next. And that was his great quality as an actor, not to look backwards, to look forwards. And there aren't too many actors out there like John Hurt. And I'm very, very proud to have worked with him.
It is true, as I go way back with darling John, who was a noble, noble man who I miss every day. And he's rather like a great record. Well, he's like a great record or a piece of music we love, because we're going to hear John so much, have heard him so much since he departed. But anyway, it's strange that it was Ian McShane, because my dad, who was a film director, cast John and Ian in their first roles from RADA, the final year play. And that was called The Wild and the Willing, and they remained close friends since then. And although I was only 13 years old, I think it was 1962 when this film was made, John taught me to 10-pin bowl, and we remained friendly ever since. John arrived to do the hit after major surgery, and in fact, every time I worked with John, he had terrible injuries. He arrived with long scars from surgery, or he either broke his foot, broke his hand in the endeavour. So he was much injured. And much injured, he arrived in Tangier to act on Jim Jarmusch's Only Lovers Left Alive, where he plays a vampire, which I sort of hope he is. So,
John used to joke with me that one of the reasons he took the part of Doctor Who was he couldn't face telling me that he'd turned it down. I am one of the Dalek-owning class, and he gave me his 50th anniversary T-shirt. Those involved in the production wrote a wonderful tribute to John, including the words, "John Hurt was as fine an actor as ever drew breath, and once, for that moment, he was the Doctor." Thank you, John, for letting me be a little part of your journey, for sitting beside me for a screening of Alien, however weird it was to sit beside you for that particular scene. for being my Doctor Who and my friend. If you were here today, you would tell Anwen how fantastic she looks, how special she is. And you would turn to us and you would say, our love for you is now measured in the love we show to Anwen.
Sometimes when we speak at the celebration of a person's life, we can go a little off the deep end with our praise. We talk about our lost friends as if they were shining exemplars of all human qualities, flawless, paragons, saints, heroes. We can say for absolute certain that John would have hated any such talk about himself. Will you please shut the fuck up? And yet, and yet I'm going to suggest that in many respects, certainly as far as I'm concerned, Sir John Vincent Hurd was just about the most perfect person I ever had the pleasure of knowing. I don't mean that he was a whited sepulchre of moral rectitude and blameless virtue. Fuck no. But my ideal person should first and foremost be good company, a truly stimulating companion. And who could qualify more for that than John? He was one of those people who, when he went into a party and you saw that he was there, your heart leapt. Although he wasn't a gossip or a bitch in the way that most of us actors are, you made your way straight to him in order to get his view on the particular award ceremony or charity event or premiere and what it was really all about. And of course, the perfect person not only makes your heart leap up, but he pays you the priceless compliment of appearing to be pleased to see you as well. I think many in this room will know exactly what I mean when I talk about that boyish smile that lit up his face. And if he turned it onto you and gave you the impression that he was pleased to see you, it made you feel you were walking on air. And there's a reason for this, I think, that's beyond the profound charm, that impish, boyish, mischievous charm that radiated from him. It's because you knew, or sensed at least, from the first time that you got to know him, or even in my case, the first time I saw him on screen, which I think was a film called Sinful Davy. And then I saw him as Richie Rich, of course, in Man for All Seasons. And many, many other things followed. And I always marked him out in that way you do. Actors that really make an impression. Oh, there's that guy. There's that John Hurd. But you sensed that he had a deep, unflinching, authentic, and in a sense serious, in the French sense of sérieux, code. A moral code, an ethical code. Human qualities mattered to him, qualities like honesty, loyalty, honour, candour, consideration. He wasn't a snob about intellect, talent, fame, social importance, or any other cheap signifier. But you knew that he held a very high doctrine of decency, truthfulness, personal grace, kindness, and a proper way of dealing with people. In that sense, he was one of the few people I know who was close to chivalric. Jeremy used the word noble, and he really had that quality, like a romantic Arthurian. God knows he could be naughty and disgraceful and embarrassing and disruptive. I did a film with him in Germany, and the press junket for it at Claridge's, Joel Silver, the producer, some of you may know, was trying to run it properly and get every journalist to ask wonderful questions about this film and how great it was going to be. And at the time, John had just announced, or it had been announced, that he was going to do a sequel to The Naked Civil Servant and play Quentin Crisp again. And one of the journalists said, John, playing a homosexual, playing a gay man, you played it so well, a lot of people must have thought you were gay, because sometimes you can be quite camp. Did that ever worry you? Because, let's face it, you're quite clearly not gay. And John said, darling, don't forget, when I was at school, I wanked off every boy who didn't wear glasses. It's like, you can imagine what an American producer would make of that. And I said to him afterwards, I said, what was wrong with the poor boys with glasses? He said, well, you have to draw the line somewhere. But
John, in practically everything I've seen him do, certainly on stage, was able to play failure and regret better than anyone I know. He didn't really need to say a great deal. When the lights went up and he had the right set and the right costume, you sort of got 3/4 of the character. When we did this play, at the gate, first of all. We took it around and we came into town with it, and we also took it to Charleston. We were at the gate and we opened in it, and after the show one evening, Michael Colgan, our producer, came round and said that Bono had been in to see it, and would we like to have a drink afterwards. So we went to this little sort of office at the back of the theatre, and sure enough, Bono was there, and he came up and he said how much he'd enjoyed it. And he said, I don't go to stage shows very much because I find them very theatrical. And, you know, you were real, but mostly it's very theatrical. And John and I say, oh, yes. And then as he moved away, he said, have you seen his show? So I said, yes, it's quite theatrical. Anyhow, John was a dear. He was a gentleman. He was a sort of wonderful person to be on stage with because you felt completely safe. He was always working in the present. And what I mean by that was that he reinvented the play every evening. It was always new. And when there's just two of you on stage, that's terribly important because you play off one another. He was a wonderful person to work with, but his crowning glory, above all, was Krapp's last tape. I don't think I will ever see an actor play that part again as well as John did. He made it into something completely, something else. And I will always remember John as a great actor and a dear, dear man.
I'll begin by just saying a few words about that scene, is that we had rehearsed it a couple of times, and we had a problem with the actor who plays the sadistic guard, in that he was rather too physical. In fact, on just an earlier rehearsal, when he smacked Paolo Manicelli on the face, I said, you're hitting him too hard, you know, it's an illusion, and stuntman talked to him. And he said, I never touched him, and Paolo Bonicelli spat out the broken teeth, and we were worried that he might hit his eye because he had, and then we did another rehearsal, and he was meant to grab John first by the collar and then grab his glasses, as you saw, and he walked towards John, and John had a very wispy beard, and this chap, actor, I won't say his name, grabbed the wispy beard of John's, and he pulled the hairs out of his chin, and we all went, oh, because you could hear them pull out. And John went ballistic, and he jumped on him, and this tiny little man on top of this huge man, and at least 3 prop men and the entire crew trying to prise John off of him was extraordinary, because I say that only because it was so the opposite to how he always was on set, the most gentle of gentlemen. And when I first met John to talk about the part, where I was chatting away as directors do, and he didn't say much, he took a piece of paper on my desk and he was drawing, because he was a great artist, and at the end of me chatting away, he pushed a piece of paper towards me, and there was Max, the character he plays, exactly drawn. The wispy beard, the glasses, a little bit of elastoplast on the glasses, tousled hair. He looked absolutely identical to how he would be in the film, which is extraordinary in that how he understood how the part should be. And every time I saw John subsequently, the first thing he said is, what did I do wrong? I said, well, you were brilliant. You know, you won BAFTA and for this part and got nominated for an Oscar and stuff. He said, no, it's my next job I'm worried about. You never cast me again. And I don't know why I didn't, because to me, I suppose it's a ridiculous thing for a director, is that for me, selfishly, this was the part for me. And I couldn't imagine John doing anything else. And he, of course, was the absolute opposite. It's anathema for an actor to think that it's only one part, because they play so many parts. And I have to say that, you know, if you work, and also to work with him was like, it was take 1, take 2, take 3. and it would be perfect. And, you know, as a director, you've got to say, well, I think we better go again, because no one can be that good. And he was always that good. And it was extraordinary. And I said to him, when he did Heaven's Gate with Mr. Cimino, Cimino was famous for doing 60 takes. And so I said to John, how did you get on? He said, well, he said, for first 50 takes, I just had fun. He said, bit of Dickens, bit of Long John Silver, bit of Shakespeare, and about take 50, then I'd do what I would have done on take 1.
As I said, we had many messages, both video messages, recorded messages, and also written messages. Perhaps the most extraordinary is from Shia LaBeouf. And Anwen was very keen that to read this, we had Alex Lawther. Please welcome Alex Lawther to the stage.
The world will long remember John Hurt. He was an extraordinary man with an unbelievable artistic legacy, a legacy with weight, which he used to champion those around him who had none. He was the soul of any set he was on, the only lion I ever had dinner with. To look in John's eyes was to stare at the moon, the history, the stories. He wasn't just a mentor and a friend. John Hurt was a fucking god to me. He read Oscar Wilde to me over the phone when I got arrested and would tell me I was not unique in my transgressions. He would recite Shakespeare in the most accessible way, not as a way of showing off or being an intellectual snob about it, but with love and understanding. For a 25-year-old who hated Shakespeare, John was a great actor because John was a great person. Those who knew him loved him and ache with his passing. He was forever interested. That was his default setting, curiosity. He was a restless dreamer, at times a rock. He was resilient and hilarious. Good God, was that man funny. There was a moment I remember on set when we were filming some stupid shit in an alien room with Harrison. Ray was there and Kate. We were all quite depressed from the shoot and would usually hang together in Hurt's trailer where the levity was, listening to his stories. We all looked up to John and treasured the days he was around. He was a rebel for as long as I knew him, and long before I knew him. How he survived the life he lived will never make sense to me. His experiences and setbacks would have broken a lesser man, crushed them to putty. It would have been easy for John to become bitter and hardened by it all, to surrender to self-pity and regret, to retreat from public life, to live out his life in peaceful quiet with his wife, who I know he loved dearly. No one would have blamed him for that. He had already given so much, but that was not John Hurt. He didn't go away from things, he went toward them. He was extravagant. John would want me to hyphenate that word, extravagant. He would want me to remind you that it meant to walk out of bounds. He did that often, but never aimlessly. John was the dreamer Wilde spoke of when he wrote, "The dreamer is the one who can find his way by moonlight. His punishment is that he sees the dawn before the rest of us." Not long ago, when I was going through it, Hurt wrote me a one-sentence email. To be great is to be misunderstood. He had insight I could lean on, and not just me. I've heard the same said by Gary Oldman, who told me John was his favourite actor, and told me how nervous he was when he first met John, and how John put his finger in Gary's nose and told him, "Just breathe." John was always tender to us. He knew who he was to the young actor. He never floated that sir shit around. He always met you on an equal playing field. He kept it playful. He made you feel like greatness was accessible to you. He made you feel great. He was forever competitive, but always kept it light, playful. He was so charismatic because he was so self-aware. Though it is his achievements we will remember, it is his heart we will miss. It is the friend and colleague who, no matter what he was going through, would not hesitate to ask you what he could do to help, or remind you that you're not unique when that's all you needed to hear. It is the man who sent birthday wishes and thank you notes to so many, He would never imagine a man of his stature taking the time to think about somebody like them. All of us have stories like this, the ones that start with, "You will never believe who called me today." We cannot know how long we are here. We cannot foresee what will pop up and test us. We can't know what God's plan is, or if there is a God. Or what we can do is live our lives with purpose, with love and joy. When I close my eyes and think of hurt, I see a man who knew how to live. The hurt behind my closed eyes is smiling. He did it right. If there is a God, John will meet him. Bless John Hurt for blessing us all. Shia LaBeouf.